Today I'm going to provide an update on the COVID outbreak in Darwin and Katherine. I will then talk about new modelling from the Darwin Institute, which National Cabinet released today. It will be a long opener and I appreciate your patience. The Northern Territory has recorded no new cases of COVID-19 overnight or this morning. The cluster remains at 3 cases. This is the good news. However, we do have more work to do. The 21-year-old source case of this outbreak has been cooperative today. However, it has taken a lot of time to fully corroborate her story. We are now confident we've identified, isolated and tested all of her known close contacts. By that, I mean contacts she knew and spent time with. However, we believe there may be unknown close contacts, and we're particularly concerned with doing more contact tracing work on the Noonamar Hotel exposure site. This is a new exposure site that has been listed today. The day of concern for this site was November 2, Melbourne Cup Day. It was a busy day at the venue. The source contact spent just over 4 hours at the Noonamar Tavern from 2:12 p.m. to 6:17 p.m. We believe there were about 350 people who frequented the hotel during this period, but we had just 47 check-ins. The lack of check-ins has greatly increased the workload for our contact tracers. To give us the time to do the contact tracing and testing work we need to do, we're extending the lockout for Greater Darwin by 24 hours to midnight Tuesday. We take decisions to implement, extend or lift a lockdown or lockout seriously. It's not something that Cho or any of us take lightly. We realise it can be disruptive. It is a Cho direction that people need to check in when they go to a business. It is a Cho direction that businesses take responsible and reasonable measures to monitor check-ins and ensure patrons are doing the right thing. It is a Cho direction that business must have a COVID-19 safe plan. It is a Cho direction that as part of this COVID safe plan, a business must have a COVID-19 supervisor to monitor check-in compliance. None of these things appear to have happened at the Noonamar Tavern on Melbourne Cup Day. As I said earlier, our source case has been cooperative today, but she has taken time to recall all of her movements during a busy few days in Darwin. We were only advised at 2:10 p.m. today that she attended Wharf 1 at the Darwin waterfront for dinner on Wednesday, November 3, and I don't have an exposure time for you yet for that period. We are working to get this information urgently and will provide details at coronavirus.nt.gov.au as soon as we can. There may be new close contacts from this site as well, and we are doing further contact tracing on this now. We will do the Noonamar Tavern and the Wharf 1 tracing work this afternoon and tonight. We'll be in a better position tomorrow to make a call on whether we can end the Darwin lockout. To confirm, we have 3 new exposure sites for Greater Darwin. They are the Noonamar Tavern, November 2, 2:12 p.m. to 6:17 p.m. The Huntley Do Hotel, November 2, 7:05 p.m. to 8:45 p.m. Wharf 1 Darwin, November 3, times to be advised soon. There have also been some minor changes made to previous exposure sites. Please check coronavirus.nt.gov.au for the details of these. In view of these exposure sites, we are going to extend the opening hours for the Marara drive-through testing clinic until 10 p.m. tonight. I'll repeat that. The Marara drive-through testing clinic is open until 10 p.m. tonight. The positive news for Darwin is that all of the indicators we do have still look good. 2,152 tests were done yesterday. We already have 1,900 of these back, all negative. We had 126 close contacts prior to today's new information. All of them are isolated. 117 of them have received negative tests. We expect the remaining 9 tests back today. We will get updated wastewater testing back this evening, which will take us through until November 7th. I'm not promising we can lift the lockout tomorrow at midnight. We need to do some work. On to Katherine. At this stage, it's all great news. No new positives. The 12 close contacts in Katherine are all located, isolating, and have returned negative tests. Of the 60 casual Katherine contacts, 51 have been located and received a test. In light of this excellent information, we will lift the Katherine lockout at 5 p.m. today. This means that life in Katherine effectively goes back to normal with a mask mandate until this Friday at 5 p.m. A few rules around masks for Katherine. You must wear a mask when you cannot physically distance yourself 1.5 metres from others. So please keep wearing your mask in shops, in bars and in all public venues. You can exercise without a mask if you're able to do so at a safe distance of 1.5 metres, and this includes at the gym. We are allowing indoor and outdoor sport to resume without the wearing of a mask. You must keep your mask on before and after the game. Dancing is allowed at venues and bars with a mask. Thank you to everyone in Katherine for a job well done to date. You have been outstanding again. Please continue to comply with the mask rules. Please keep an eye on updates in the coming days. But for now, we are very happy with where things are at in Katherine. That concludes the update on Darwin and Katherine and the outbreak. While we have been dealing with this outbreak, our team has also been hard at work going through new Doherty Institute modelling released by National Cabinet today and preparing our latest policy response. I'll move to this now. We've also briefed the land councils on this modelling today and sent an understandable apology today for this meeting, and we will be briefing them ASAP. From the very start of this global pandemic, our strategy as a nation and as a territory has been aggressive suppression of the virus, which we knew would eventually become endemic. We adopted this strategy to give ourselves enough time so that when the virus does get here, we are ready. Enough time to make sure our existing health system can cope when the virus arrives and isn't overwhelmed like so many others around the world have been. The Doherty modelling that National Cabinet released today shows that we are on track to become one of the very few places in the world that succeeded in suppressing the virus for long enough to get our vaccination rate high enough to be able to live with the virus when it inevitably gets here. There will be a handful of other states in Australia that can boast this, and New Zealand. But other than that, the virus has gotten to just about every other part of the world before they were ready, and it took a tough toll. The Doherty modelling demonstrates the success of our decisions to date, and as a result of a lot of very hard work by a lot of people. The press pack here today has just been given a series of graphs from Doherty which are now public. The first graph looks at a scenario of 80% full vaccination among Territorians aged 16 and over. We will hit this rate by next Monday, if not this week. It looks at a scenario where there are 30 to 100 cases per day in the Territory and where we apply low-level public health and social measures, PHSM, and apply partial test, trace, isolate and quarantine measures, TTIQ. Doherty's modelling shows that we can handle this scenario in both our hospital wards and our ICU units. The predicted peak ICU demand under such a scenario is 6 beds at any one time. Remember, this week we've had 3 cases and we applied a lockout in Darwin and we applied a lockdown into a lockout in Katherine. These are medium to high level public health and social measures. We also did full contact and tracing, not partial TTIQ. It's also worth remembering that we are on track to push beyond 90% double dose for vaccinations this year. Right now, we are 91% first dose vaccinations across the Territory and 78% second dose. That will give us extra protection, and we have pushed well past 60% first dose vaccination for 12 to 15s, which is not part of this modelling. Remote community vaccine rollout data is accurate to Thursday last week, and it'll be updated on Friday this week to Thursday this week. It stood at 70% first dose last Thursday and 55% full vaccination. Soon, there will be an approved vaccine for 5 to 11-year-olds in Australia, which will give us the opportunity to cut down the chains of COVID transmission even more and to keep our kids safe. So while we are confident right now that we can handle COVID in the Northern Territory when it gets here, it's not time to celebrate yet. We are not mission accomplished. It's not time to pat people on the back. But I will pause to thank every Territorian for playing their part in helping us to suppress this virus long enough to allow us to reach this point. I particularly thank everyone who has been vaccinated for helping us build that layer of protection we now have. I also thank our amazing frontline heroes for whom there are far too many to single out. You know who you are. But we still have a critical task ahead of us. There are areas of the Territory that are well below double dose 80, and we need to keep working to push our rates up everywhere. We also know we have the oldest living culture on the planet to protect, and as you all know, I asked Doherty on behalf of all states with remote communities for specific modelling. Our remote communities are more vulnerable than the rest of Australia. They have a higher rate of underlying health factors that place many of our people at greater risk of serious complications or death if they get COVID. They are also younger. The median age in Adelaide is 41. In Sydney, it's 38. In Darwin, it's 34. In Wadair, it's 25. Across many of our remote communities and homelands, it is in the low 20s. Simple maths tells us that vaccinating 80% of people 16 and over in a community where the median age is 25 won't give you the same coverage or protection as a community where the median age is 40, especially if there's a higher prevalence of health issues in the younger community. That's why it will come as no surprise to any Territorian that Doherty has set a different benchmark for our remote communities. The target vaccination rate for all remote communities and homelands across the Northern Territory is now 80% for people aged 5 or older. What this means is that we cannot hit the vaccination rate we need for any of our remote communities across the Territory yet. And we won't be able to hit the target we need until we have a TGA approved jab for 5 to 11-year-olds. We could have one by the end of the year. We will definitely have one by early next year, but we don't have one yet. The goalposts have moved and we will move with them. That means we will need public health and social measures to reduce the risk of a COVID incursion for every remote community, and I'll get to these in a minute. First, I will talk about the absolute best public health measure available, the vaccine. The most important public health measure you can do if you get a COVID case in a remote community is to rush to that community with the vaccine. What the Doherty modelling shows is that if you get a COVID case in a remote community and you do a vaccination surge in that community, you will halve the risk of hospitalisation and therefore death. Vaccination is not the only measure, it won't be our only response. But surging in with a vaccination team is a critical part of a response to a case in any remote community. Lived experience in New South Wales shows that after a case emerges, only 7% of the community say no to the vaccine when it's offered to them during an outbreak. The Doherty modelling shows 3 scenarios for a vaccine rollout where a case has emerged in a remote community. If you deliver the vaccines within 3 days of the case emerging, 5 days or 13 days. It also shows a scenario where you do nothing. The modelling is based on a community size of 1,018 people, where half of the 50 plus population is fully vaxxed, 25% of 40 to 49-year-olds are fully vaxxed, and 10% of 40 and unders are fully vaxxed. Under the Doherty modelling, in a scenario where you do nothing when a case arrives, 49 people end up in a hospital and 16 in ICU. That's 16 people fighting for their lives and 49 very sick. That's massive, unnecessary pressure on our hospitals and on our hospital workers. More than likely, it will be 16 elders or emerging leaders in that community fighting for their lives, and many will lose that battle. This will be devastating. It would mean loss of culture, loss of leadership, loss of stability. Let's be clear, we will not do nothing. We will act, and we will act fast. We will have teams on the ground immediately making the vaccine available. And we know that if we do that, we can hit a 93% vaccination rate, either first dose or double dose, very quickly in that community. The Doherty modelling shows taking this action will halve the amount of people who end up in hospital. That's how good the vaccine is. Let's be clear though, under this scenario, lives will be lost, especially if we're getting to a low-vax community after COVID has arrived. The absolutely overwhelmingly scientifically proven best thing is for everyone to get vaccinated before there is a case. And everyone that's eligible in every remote community has had the time and the chance to do this. We've had the vaccine in the Territory for 7 months now, and everyone in the Territory has had the time and chance to get vaccinated. That includes everyone in every remote community. In some parts of the Territory, there is a terrifying complacency. We're not the only place dealing with this. We know from the New South Wales example that some people don't believe the virus is real until it is there. We don't want to have to surge into a low-vax community with a vaccine after the virus has arrived. But that is what we will have to do, and we will keep the virus from overwhelming us. We know that people will change their minds once the virus is present, and I guarantee that we will be there with a vaccine for you when you do. I can't promise that it won't be too late for some, but we will be there with the jab. We've tragically seen examples all over the world of people that want the vaccine when it is too late. What I want Territorians to know, based on the Doherty modelling, is that if we get COVID in any community and we have a rapid response team that includes vaccinations, we will reduce hospitalisation to a point we can manage in our existing hospital system. I'm going to pause here. I want to underline this bit. I will state the bleeding obvious with an exclamation mark. The higher the vaccination rate, the lower the hospitalisations and deaths. It's better that people get the vaccine before there is a case than after a case. But if there is a case, we will be there with the vaccine every time. This leaves us with 2 important things we need to do. 1, reduce the risk of COVID getting into a remote community, and 2, identifying quickly if there is a case. I will now take you through the public health measures we have in place already and the additional public health measures we will now move to have in place for remote communities. We've already got a mandate that any worker going to any remote community must have had their first vaccine dose by this Friday, November 12, and be fully vaxxed by December 24. Early identification of any cases in remote communities will be crucial. In every remote community, we'll aggressively step up our messaging around testing of symptomatic people. We have the capacity in every remote community to test sick people quickly. Often this will be with a rapid antigen test. These tests can provide a false positive, but this would quickly trigger a PCR test to confirm the result and let us know if we need to surge resources to a community. We will consider any community with a first dose rate less than 70% as a low vax community. From next Monday, November 15, anyone who enters a remote low-vax community from Darwin, Alice Springs, Katherine, or from outside the territory must wear a mask for 7 days at all times while in public. This applies every time anyone goes to these places. This will apply whether you are a resident of that community or a worker. We know masks play a strong role in preventing the spread of the virus, and this will provide an added layer of protection. Darwin, Katherine and Alice have been the sites of our cases and lockdowns to date, and that is why they've been identified as the places of exit for this mask mandate. Anyone entering a remote community from a jurisdiction outside the territories come from an area outside of our control and hence must wear a mask upon entry. For these low-vax communities, anyone entering from Darwin, Alice Springs, Katherine or from interstate will need to have had a rapid antigen test 72 hours prior to entering. This will commence from Friday, November 19 to guarantee that testing capacity and supply of rapid antigen tests are available in these locations. There will be a small cohort of workers who regularly travel to communities. For them, we're proposing to create a register where you can submit a weekly negative PCR test. These measures go to reducing the risk of incursion of COVID into a remote community and reducing the transmission risk if the virus gets in. A vaccine given prior to COVID getting to a community will always be the best public health measure. But vaccines given widely across a community after a case is present is, at that point in time, the best public health measure. By having a full vaccination mandate for workers, having a testing regime in lower vaccination communities and a conditional mask mandate, we're significantly reducing the risk of the virus getting in and spreading. An aggressive focus on testing means we will catch cases quickly, and I've already outlined our surge vaccine response if this happens. Of the 52 communities where NT Health is in charge of the vaccine rollout, 25 communities will be subject to the rapid antigen test and mask rule. So over half are above 70% first dose, and many others are closing in on this. I thank anyone in any community who's been vaccinated, and I applaud all of those communities who have hit the target we've asked of them, which is 80% double dose 16 and up. I know the majority of parents in our communities will jump at the chance to protect their young ones and get them immunised when we get a TGA-approved vaccine of our 5 to 11-year-olds. I have every confidence our vaccination rate will eclipse 80% double dose for 5 and overs in most of our communities in the not-too-distant future. As you all know, NT Health looks after about 2/3 of the remote vaccine rollout. The other third falls to the Archo sector, which is Commonwealth controlled. As you know, despite my repeated requests, I still have not got the vaccine rates in any of these communities. From today, we will re-record each of these communities as having a 0% vaccination rate. We have to assume these communities are all low vax for the time being and therefore apply all of the health measures I've just outlined. I understand positive conversations have occurred since Friday's National Cabinet and that the Archos may soon provide us with this data. I hope to be able to provide an update on this soon. As you know, NT Health released its community-by-community data about 2 months ago, and I thank the media for the responsible and fair way in which you have treated this data. I think the media have played a leadership role in how we've dealt with vaccinations in the Northern Territory. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. I'm going to make some observations about our current investigation first, and then I will touch on the Doherty modelling. So, first of all, we now have genomic testing that confirms that the strain that has entered the territory with these 3 cases is from Victoria, and that confirms the findings of our subsequent investigation. The important point to make about that is this is the first time we've done the genomic testing ourselves in the territory with our own resources and with our own expertise, and so this is a significant advance for us. I'd like to thank our team for doing that. We've always done it through interstate testing. So the other thing to say is that it's clear we've had to extend the lockout because there's quite a lot of extra work to do now. So our teams are going to be very busy again over the next 24 hours. I just want to reinforce, please, it's so important at the beginning of our investigations, when we interview you, please tell us everything that you know. Now, we know that it can take time for information to emerge, for people to recall, but there's no point in concealing things from us. We will find out eventually, and please just think about those people who are doing this work and how hard it makes their job. And the final point I want to make about this is about the use of the check-in app and QR codes. In the next piece of work that we're doing, which is going to take us another 24 hours, one of the things we're catching up on, or having to do a lot of extra work, is because the check-in app was not used in the Noonamah Tavern and in some of these other venues. Only about a quarter or less of the people who entered those places checked in. It makes it much harder to then follow up. Please use the check-in app. It makes it so much easier. It's also in your own interest. It means we can protect you earlier. We can tell you earlier if you've been in contact, and we can get to you. So that's very important, please. Now, in relation to the Doherty modelling, this has been excellent modelling that we've received now, and obviously the Doherty Institute has been providing this to other jurisdictions. We expressly asked for this to be done ourselves. And as the Chief has said, it demonstrates again extremely powerful for us how important vaccination is. That's really the foundation on which we're going to be able to protect people. As the Chief says, we will use other measures, but of course those take time and effort. And really, I ask again, if I may, to the community, please play your part. If you're vaccinated, you will be protected, and you will protect the system. You'll protect the health system. The health system could, if we don't have enough vaccinated people, it could become overwhelmed. We will do our utmost to protect you, as the Chief has said. There are a number of things that we will do, and we have confidence in those systems, and we have, as you've seen, protected people for many months now. But please get vaccinated. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Obviously a fair bit of work for us to still do. Congratulations to Katherine. We're very, very pleased that you've managed to be as compliant as you were. Again, you demonstrated wholeheartedly the community spirit there in obeying the rules, and as a result, the rewards have come sooner. Unfortunately, as has been touched on, there is still much work to do with a number of exposure sites, the Noonamah being the most prominent of those. Melbourne Cup days, you would all appreciate, a particularly busy day, and one that unfortunately now requires some further testing. Pleasingly, people have been monitoring our website. A number of people have seen that exposure site go up and have already come forward for tests. Our Marara testing facility will be open through till 10 p.m. tonight to cater for those people. So everyone who's been involved in any of those exposure sites, please know that you can come forward and get the tests, and that will certainly help us in determining our future position for tomorrow. As has also been touched on, the wastewater testing will be somewhat of a further indication for us to inform our decision making for tomorrow. More broadly, unfortunately, we're seeing some lack of compliance across some other things. We've had a runner from the airport today who came in from the Sydney flight. That is a hotspot flight, and they've run past the relevant checkpoints in place. We're currently out and about in the public place looking for that individual. This is, again, very disappointing behaviour. It's behaviour we certainly hope we would never have to devote time and resources to, but unfortunately not everybody in our community sees it quite the same way. So we'll track down that person and take the appropriate steps once we catch up with them, and we will catch up with them. The other point, of course, has been touched on, the check-in app. We are not seeing the levels of compliance that we need. Please understand how vastly important it is, because it really does cut down the time for our contact tracers to be able to make contact with you. Businesses, we really need you to step up here and make sure this is happening. It is all part of your COVID-19 business safe plans. You need to make sure that you've got people there monitoring, asking people to check in. It should be as simple as saying, are you okay? Just simply ask, have you checked in, and make sure that that's the case. Certainly as we move to next Friday, that's the plan that's got to be in place to ensure that that's all going on. We've had a number of other things that are starting to cause some level of concern, as I'm advised out of our Emergency Operations Centre. A few more arrivals that are turning up without pre-approvals on our interstate flights. Those people are not being allowed to enter into the Northern Territory. Again, we want to get the message out to your family and friends, if they are planning on coming up, particularly from the hotspots, please go through the pre-approval process. That really does help us to make sure that the movement through the border is safe and that we're mitigating risk wherever possible. To Darwin, unfortunately, at least through till midnight tomorrow night at this point in time, please continue to observe the lockout. Anyone travelling from Katherine into Darwin, be aware that you would be obliged to observe the lockout rules that are in place up here. Be conscious of that if you are choosing to make that travel, and defer it if you don't need to come up in the next day or so. Plenty of work going on, as it's just been now touched on, about where we're planning to be in the future. That requires now a lot of even got that word mixed up. We need to operationalise those plans, and that now will have a significant body of work. We've been working through what Doherty was likely to go to, so many of our rapid response plans for our remote communities have covered off those things. We'll now formalise those more intricately to cover off the particular mitigations for those low-vax communities. We do need to make sure we're covering this off territory-wide and continue the work we're doing. So much praise to all of those people who've got us here to date. A little bit more further push through Darwin. Stay compliant, please. Keep your shoulder to the wheel, and we should be able to see your way through. Thank you.
Chief Minister, 4,500 vaccines, 2,000 first dose administered on Friday. They were recorded on Saturday. Is that a record, and what have numbers for vaccinations been like over the weekend?
It's been an absolutely outstanding response. I think the only day that beat it for bookings was the very first day that we made bookings available. So quite an extraordinary response from Territorians. Our first dose rate's up to 79, our second dose rate's up to 78. I believe on Friday last week that was 89 and 75. So we've seen a good percentage jump there on both the first dose and second dose figures, and I expect that to continue through this week, hopefully. We obviously need to keep working out in those remote areas, but we get those updates weekly now in those numbers, so I'll know next Friday what the remote reaction has been.
Is the NT going to put hold plans to ease border restrictions when we hit 80%, given the low vaccination rate in some of these regional communities?
So it'll be clear the changes we're making at this stage on November 22 is moving from quarantine to quarantine. We're going from Centre for National Resilience to a home quarantine situation in those areas where there is a high vaccination rate. Obviously, we're getting to a point now where asking a double-dosed person to go quarantine at the Centre for National Resilience is over the top. It's just a waste of resources. If you look at all the risk, and Doherty's done a whole bunch of work on this too, home quarantine is a very safe option with the compliance measures that we have got in place for double-dosed people in high vaccination areas. So we're still comfortable with the move from quarantine to quarantine. We've obviously deliberately taken a very staged approach through this. A minimum of 28 days between steps, so we've got time to keep reviewing things as we go, but we're very confident in the move from quarantine to quarantine.
The the mandate comes into effect very soon, but what did we learn about the lockout in terms of how this will impact public servants that aren't vaccinated, people like teachers, police officers, people in your office that might not be vaccinated?
We've had very minimal, if any, impact. I've not been advised of any impact on the public service, to be honest, as we've gone through this. We're tracking very confidently up towards Friday, November 12th for the first dose mandate. At this stage, we're still not aware of any concerns in any part of government that will be under pressure for the mandate.
But what happens if those public servants aren't vaccinated? Do they lose their job? Do they go into non-public facing roles? What happens?
If there is a public servant as of Friday the 12th who is subject to the CHO direction and requires a first dose vaccine and hasn't had that first dose vaccine, we will go through a formal process to see if there's a genuine role available for them. It has to be genuine. We're not going to make up work. If there is no genuine role available for them and there is a proper process we have to go through, then they'll obviously face dismissal.
I know we're getting into the minutiae of it a little bit now, but if they have a booking for after the mandate date comes into play, will they just not be able to work up until that booking date? Can they still come into work? How's that going to work?
Well, that will be managed through the HR process. Obviously, get the vaccine prior to November 12 will be the obvious answer there. But we're required to go through a process formally. It's a HR thing. Everyone will be going through this. We'll go through that formal HR process.
We have heard from businesses, and we saw even over this past weekend, sort of restaurants and food outlets that were closed because they didn't have enough staff because their staff aren't vaccinated. Are you concerned that come Friday you're going to see a real issue with workforce in some areas?
I think a lot of people were working towards the November 12 date. Obviously, the lockout occurred prior to November 12, so I've had a lot of feedback. People were working towards November 12 as the date, which is reasonable. That's the date for implementation. My concern is with vulnerable people and with COVID. And we know that if COVID comes and we cannot handle it in the Northern Territory, people will die. That's an experience everywhere else in the world. So my concern, 100%, is with making sure that we get our COVID plans right and we protect Territorians from COVID. There may be some people out there who come November 12 still choose not to be vaccinated. That's their choice. I think it's unfair on Territorians to make that choice. I think it's unfair on their employer who's giving a wage that they make that choice. But if that's the choice they make, that's the choice they make.
Has there been any impact on the home quarantine trial with the demand for extra testing?
No, I might pass to the Commissioner. I'm not aware of any impacts on the home quarantine pilot through the lockout. Do you want to add to that, Commissioner?
Thank you. We've managed to keep the home quarantine pilot going, so we've had a number of other people come in over the weekend, and the teams are keeping on seeing who we can transition into that place. One of our limitations, more particularly around Palmerston, is just the vaccination rate, and people not necessarily being comfortable with the family they may have that are not vaccinated. But the pilot's working quite well, and to date we've had people who've already gone through that process and have completed their time, and those currently still in there have all returned negative tests to date.
Is there any figures on how many people are in there at the moment, or how many people have gone through the pilot?
It continues to grow each and every day as we transition people in and out. The intent is still to grow it upwards of 100, and obviously just prior to the lockout that stymied a few people choosing to come up here, but we expect that to pick up speed again once we get through the current lockout phase.
Is there any...
identified the liquid that was thrown at police officers on Saturday and the people who were involved?
We certainly know the people involved. We've been doing a significant amount of work in that space. As it relates to the liquid, that still remains something that we're currently undertaking some assessment of.
Have you made any more arrests since Saturday?
We made 7 arrests during and very much close proximity to the protest. We made a further 2 arrests of people who attended one of our police facilities where they believe we were holding some people related to that protest. We've made no further arrests to this point in time.
Have you laid any charges at this stage, and do you expect to?
The charges were all laid to those particular individuals through the course of Saturday afternoon, evening. And again, for those others that we're going to work through, as soon as those relevant processes and the investigation goes through, those people will be afforded the opportunity for interview, and then we'll determine the next course of action as it relates to the charging.
Are you able to clarify what kind of charges we're looking at here?
Certainly aggravated assault, as I indicated yesterday, will be front and centre. There may be other disturbance-related offences, but we'll step through those. I won't predetermine any of those outcomes.
Are you able to say if and what types of injuries officers sustained?
Certainly we had some with burns. I think you also would have seen some images that gave clear indication to some injury where unfortunately the skin was broken and officers were bleeding as a result of that. But all in all, they've managed to recover relatively well, and one continues to receive treatment for his burns particularly.
Do you know if the 21-year-old woman will face further penalties other than the $5,000 fine?
At this point in time, from us, it doesn't appear that there's anything that would indicate that that would be the case. Again, through the course of today, she's not local, I think is important to point out. So where these locations are, identifying them, unfortunately, through memory recall, we've spent another significant amount of the time today going through these places with her. We're comfortable now that we've got a lot more fulsome information and the other work we've done around her movements to identify these places. However, it would be pertinent to suggest that other jurisdictions may still be interested in having a conversation with her and her movements.
So did she use the check-in app at all?
Look, that's not readily apparent to us at the moment. As I say, where we've been picking this up is as we've been getting indications from those that have either been close contacts and others, and then backtracking and checking in with her, we've been able to identify those further movements, and then through a review of CCTV identify that she has or hasn't been there. But if we go back to it, it's very, very clear that unfortunately the mitigation of the check-in app, as safe as it is, as quick as it will be to make sure our resources can get advice to you much quicker if you have been exposed, people are simply not using it and businesses aren't obliging people to use it, so we really need everyone to step up in that space.
And this runner from Sydney, was it? How concerning is that, and are you planning on throwing the book at them to deter other people from doing the same thing?
Well, we certainly will be catching up with him, and there is no justification for the behaviour in any way, shape or form, so it's pretty much a straight-up regulatory offence which the infringement notice will be able to treat. However, we can't turn our mind to what his motivation may have been, and we'll fully explore that as well.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.